So yeah, I've been working on this project, and the project itself is not what I want to chat about. Mostly it's how I've structured it, because it's both a web and mobile project, and because I'm not a huge fan of Java anymore, it used to be, I didn't want to build a native Android app, and I've done Objective-C before, and it's cool and all, but I decided I'd give Ionic a shot. Does anybody, that's my daughter, does anybody know what Ionic is? Or raise your hand if you don't know what Ionic is. Okay, quite a few people, that's all right. Oh, I haven't connected yet, sorry. Give me a sec. Where is it? Is it? No.
Yes.
Okay. See if I know how to spell lavender. It's lavender. If I know how to spell it. So Ionic is a, well, raise your hand if you don't know what PhoneGap is or Cordova. Okay, so really quickly, Cordova, PhoneGap, those two kind of together, they make it possible for you to build a mobile application that has in JavaScript and HTML and CSS. Okay, so I'm not going to do that. Anyway, Ionic is a framework that's built on top of those technologies that is, you could think of it like Bootstrap, or yeah, Twitter Bootstrap for mobile, that's built on top of AngularJS. And so it uses AngularJS technologies. They have a bunch of modules that you can use to make really cool applications for mobile. So mostly what I want to show about it, you can go look at this yourself, but this is my Bucket Streams mobile project, and here in my www I have my Bower components, and one of my Bower components is BSJS common, and that's not BS as you would think it, it's actually Bucket Streams. So in here I have my common constants, directives, filters, modules, and services. And this is, as you can see, it's a Bower component. And so let's go ahead and, this is the web application here. And in my public I have the Bower components, and I also have BSJS common. And so this code, and this is like about 1,500 lines of code, that's half of my web application right now. It all lives in this common repository that I share between the projects using Bower. And so when I want to change my, my user model here, I change it in one place, and then I can go to the other projects, do a Bower update BSJS common, and it will pull my changes into those different repositories. So I change it in one place, and it propagates to the others. And assuming that I actually test this as I should, then I can ensure that those tests work. And so the way that this works is I have my models and my filters and my directives. So if I go into the app.js of my models, I just have a module called BS common models. And then inside of my app.js in here, I have that as an internal mod. It's, or let's see, no. Where is, oh yeah, BS common, here we go. So this BS common module is dependent on this BS common models. So that's defined here. And so I bring all of my common modules in here as dependencies of this BS common module. And then I depend on that in both my web project as well as my my mobile project. Right. Oh, sorry guys. I don't know how to do that. Anybody a WebStorm guru?
Finger expand.
Gracias. Is that better? I'm sorry guys. Sorry, what? Okay. Okay, so yeah, here on my mobile app, I'm dependent on BS common as well. And so this way, all of my directives, pretty much all of my directives, I have a directive for posts because it's a social media site, so you need posts. I have a directive for a stream of posts. I have, and then a bunch of like utility services and different things to communicate with my backend. It's all shared using Bower and because I'm on Ionic and AngularJS. So, do we have our next speaker? Or?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, awesome.
Keep going if you'd like to.
Well, I'll go ahead and just open it for questions, and you can come and talk to me after. I'm totally happy to share a little bit more on this. But yeah, Ron. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, just for the streaming, I guess, how native can Ionic and PhoneGap make the apps that you build in JavaScript on Android and iOS? And it, like, to me, I feel like it's pretty well made. Like Ionic, like I said, it's kind of Twitter bootstrap for mobile. So it doesn't look exactly like all the components don't look exactly like they would if you built it natively, but it's very well polished and it's a good experience. They have like icons that make a lot of sense on mobile, a lot of really good utilities, and then also like Ionic does a couple of special things where they check, are you on Android? Then we're going to do this behavior. Are you on iOS? And we'll do this behavior. And so like it kind of tries to emulate the actual what you would expect on the platform. So, yeah.
Is there a minimum version requirement for respective platforms?
Yeah, there is, but I can't recall what they are. I feel like for Android it's like 4.
Is it 4? Okay.
Yeah, I think you could look online, but I'm pretty sure that they're limited to 4. I'm not sure what iOS is. 5. Yeah. So, any other questions before I turn it over to somebody for real? Okay, thanks guys.
I just wanted to make a couple quick announcements. I took notes so I wouldn't forget, because I always forget something, I feel like. So we tried the hack room last month. A lot of comments on the meetup page said like that was a cool idea, but then no one went to it last month. So we're still going to do it again this month if anyone wants to try. We do have a live stream this month, so it'll be live streamed out there. If you want to go up, you can still watch the talks and whatnot, and then hang out up there as well, if that's of any interest. Also, I'm really excited that O'Reilly has accepted us into their user group community, which means to every member here that we get 40% off of print books and also 50% off the digital books. So that's like a huge, huge perk for us. I'm really excited, and a shout out to them for sponsoring us. I have the code. It's really easy. It's DSUG, like Delta Sierra Uniform Golf. Go to their website, O'Reilly.com, enter that code. You get 50% off or 40% off, depending if you get in digital or print. They do ask that you do some reviews in return. Review the books that you buy from them, post something up on either Amazon or Slashdot or whatever. That's just a really cool perk. I'm excited for that. Other than that, I don't have anything else. Our first talk is by Scott Ashton, and then our second talk by Chris Esplin. We'll turn the time over to them. Thanks, you guys.
How do you unplug in this projector? I don't think I have that connection. Oh, okay. Wait, clip? Just like up here or something? Okay. Here the microphone is. Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay, so anyhow, my talk is inspired by the mediator design pattern. So, and I'm essentially kind of started out as how can we make Angular applications a little bit more like this? Because it seemed to be a natural fit. Because if you think of a typical page, you know, this is like the controller, we could say, the mediator, and then all the different components theoretically could be like directives. And so any given page is just, you're kind of composing together these different directives. In my experience in practice, most directives are pretty small though, like a date picker, like little widgets that you really, yeah, they're not big pieces. And so I was trying to figure out a way around that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take you through the different ways you could do it. I'm using an example of a form. It's a pretty simple example. Going from the traditional approach kind of to the more component-based approach. I call it the hook-based approach, and I'll explain that when I get to it, after I've kind of explained what the issues are that I see with kind of the existing approaches. Okay, so right here we just got a form. So small. Okay, so you're just like, Scott. Say I forget, we're going to do some validation. I'll show you. Done to done. And then, okay, so this is, then you have like an error, you're like, okay, blah, blah. And it works. And then it did an AJAX request to just, verify the user exists. This is all mock. So let me show you the code. So I imagine this code looks familiar to any of you who are very familiar with Angular. So this is our view. We have our controller, we're declaring it. And so then we have like this form, like, okay. There's these little alerts which only show, as you can see right there. Oh, screen's too small. Only show if the form has an error. So kind of just this. Is this? Can you raise your hand if like this is familiar to you and from your Angular development? Like this is pretty much how all the examples show it. And yeah, so then that's how it works. And then to do the AJAX thing, we have to, on the form submit, first we have to pass the form itself, and then check if it's valid, and if it's not, and then if it, we essentially have to tell those alerts that, yeah, you should, whichever ones of you are wrong, you should trigger. Do you want like any sort of feedback after you click the button? You've got to pass the event to your controller. And then if you want any sort of like asynchronous, like after the request, you've got any sort of error, you have to like pass a call, or have this callback, and then when it comes back, like this creates the error message. So personally, I see a lot of issues with this approach. Like for one thing, I just don't want to have to write these little things for every single form I do. It's just super annoying to me. Controller, I personally think it seems like there's quite a few like it's not doing a great job of separating concerns. So, I mean, for instance, in order to get this AJAX overlay over your button to let the user know that the submission is happening, but we're trying to verify, we have to pass this event from the click, and then we've got to grab it like this. There's really no way to test that. In my opinion, that doesn't belong in the controller. And then you have all this stuff has purely to do with visuals. Like okay, like if there was a non-unique error, we should set this to false. And this is all the stuff for the form validation. Just lots of ancillary stuff that is, purely dependent. It's very much view-focused stuff, so it doesn't belong there. So to take a traditional Angular approach to fix this, you can use a directive, obviously. So this does the exact same thing that you just saw in the other form. Well, actually, it does have a slightly different validation. Anyhow, it just does that differently. So in this one, we just say, okay, we just declare a directive. It's a UI form, no hooks. We pass it some form info. That's just a JSON object right here. And just a form in JSON format. A little more readable. I personally don't like looking at HTML. So that's why I kind of structure my directive to just accept that. And then I have to pass it a callback function. So on this form, after the user submits, this will be executed, this callback function. And also we have like the submit URL. So like, okay, once it's submitted, you have to go to this URL. And then once it's returned, you do that. So it's kind of hard-coded. You just have to do it that way. And then, yeah, we still have this little thing right here, this non-unique thing. So in our controller, it's a lot simpler. Well, our view is a lot simpler. I mean, just comparing this to this mess. Yeah, that makes me want to like shoot myself right there. So this is much better. I still think there's a problem though. Like this information belongs in the view more. It's static. I'm just declaring parameters that what I want to have on this page. And another thing that I really dislike about this approach is I'm passing so many things. I'm passing this. I'm passing this callback function. I'm passing the submit URL. And so I don't know if you guys have any, well, your guys' take on this, but like, I really hate having to pass tons of information to my directives. It's just like, once again, makes me want to shoot myself. And I'm like, it makes me think, why don't I just make this, why don't we just include this in the view itself? And what happens is when your directives become extensions of your controller, when your directives are just purely page specific, like why did you even go to bother making directives in the first place? It's not reusable. This one I think arguably is reusable, this directive I've made. But I would show you the code, but it's not super important, but just same thing. Just does that validation. And then anyhow. Okay, so the last approach is with hooks. So can you raise your hand if like you have experienced like WordPress or Drupal hooks? Okay, so not a ton of people. Oh, second. It like fell. It was on the ground. That would explain it. Yes, that would explain it. Okay. Sorry about that, people. Any questions on like those first two traditional approaches? Like, did my implementation seem kind of what you guys are used to? Seems like not too crazy. Any takes, opinions, like anything? Okay, I'm not talking a bunch. Okay, all right. So anyhow, the hook method. Okay, so there weren't too many WordPress people with WordPress background. So essentially what this approach is in WordPress and also in Drupal, although I'm not familiar with Drupal, is the WordPress core, it has these hooks all throughout the code. Like at one point they're pulling the blog post. At one point they're formatting them. I don't know. Like there's just tons of like little places that they define as hooks, which you as a plugin author, you can just go in and say like, at this hook, I want to insert some code. And you can kind of just like interrupt the normal execution of WordPress with your code. And also in other cases, WordPress passes you some value, like maybe the list of blog posts, and then you can alter it and then send it back, and then it does its normal execution with that modified blog post. So any questions on that, like clarifications? No? Okay. So anyhow, so I want to do that with Angular. So I'm not going to go into the details of like how I did that, just because I kind of want to focus on the end product. Because in my opinion, what the technology enables you to do is more important than the technology itself. I mean, if the technology is like super complicated and technical, but it's not useful, there's really no usage. So as you're kind of seeing this, I want you to begin thinking, like, what do you feel about this approach? Like, if it'd be useful, if you feel, just your opinion, because I honestly just want feedback on this approach. So form is exactly the same. Okay, right here, so we have this UI form. We just pass it this new user form. And obviously, this is declared in our hooks controller scope. I have this. So now, with the hooks approach, I have another file which holds what I call view data. And for lack of a better word, this is just essentially JavaScript that is only relevant to the view. It's pretty much static, pretty boring, like views themselves. So just declares what you want the forms to look like, etc. And so the directive takes that, makes this form. And so the hook right here, I'm just saying I want to extend the hooks controller with this code. So this code is basically injected at the bottom of the controller. Sorry, I always forget how small this screen is. So this code is injected at the bottom of the controller. Any questions on that? So just take your controller.
Does that extend services?
Yeah, so that's it. That's what it does. So you say, I want to extend the hooks controller, and then you pass it a function, and then this function executes. Also, you can do dependency injection right here. You can just treat this like a regular controller.
That's the hook framework, the extend service.
Right, the extend service. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I should have made that clear. Yeah, this is not baked in. So essentially, we're extending our controller. So here's our controller. And so, oh no. Okay, so our controller, we're saying, okay, on the hook UI form pre-submit promise. So somewhere in my UI form, there's declared this hook called the before submit promise. And so that we're going to handle that event in the execution of the directive. So obviously, this hook happens after the submit button is clicked, and it's valid. So then this code, the ensure unique, is going to execute. So we have it right here. So they're going to pass us the form data, and just based on what the hook is expecting, and it's going to be different for every hook, this hook is expecting a promise. So imagine this code being injected into the directive's execution. So I'm like, okay, let's make a promise, a deferred object. We do this demo HTTP request. We return the promise, and then when the callback returns, we resolve it to false, saying, there was a non-unique person. So any questions on that? So we hooked that, then this executed, and yeah. Oh, and then the directive took this promise, and presumably there's some code that's going to execute once that promise resolves. So the directive is saying like, okay, I'll hold off executing until this promise gets resolved, and you just give me a promise. So, okay. Then when it resolves, also here in the controller, what I do is I call a hook. So you can set hooks and you can call hooks. And this calling hooks is not at all like WordPress. And this is really just more like an API. So you can imagine each directive is having an API. And you can call that API from the controller. So like, hey, any UI forms underneath my scope, I want to call the submit error function. And the directive can do with that whatever it wants. Like, I don't know, somehow it's going to let the user know that there's an error. And then we just pass the message to it. Yeah. So that's the framework in a nutshell. Just to summarize, we extend services, and these are just appended to the bottom. And we also set hooks inside of directives. We set hooks with the code we want to be executed inside of directives. And importantly, it's not just a broadcast out into the ether. It's the directive is waiting for your response before it continues. And it also can give you a return value. So, yeah, okay, so any questions? Okay.
I'm curious to look again at the code where the directive in your markup, like where is that?
Yeah, let me bring that up. We had another question back there. Well, I'll go into that a little later. I mean, the idea is, though, that eventually you can create a directive, and the directive is just, in terms of on your controller, it's just a service. Like, it's going to have an API, and you just interact with it via the API, and you don't actually have to know what's happening in the internals of that directive, but you're not barred from accessing it. Because as we saw on like these earlier examples, like if we wanted to do form validation or like ensure the username was unique, we had to know what was happening inside the controller. We had to know that it was expecting a callback function. And essentially it's a tacit API, but I just like making it more explicit. There's another question back there?
So is this an academic example, or are you using this in production?
So no, this is just proof of concept. I just barely began developing this. Yeah. So it's really made up of two components. The hooked component, which you can register inside of directives, and then like the API hook component, so you can call something in the directive. And the second facet of this, I guess you call it framework or approach, is you can extend controllers. And actually, you also can extend directives. So if I extended a directive, like imagine I replaced that hooks controller with UI form, I would inject that code at the bottom of the link function. So I could overwrite whatever scope variables, et cetera, that were declared in the directive's link function. So this extend, I mean, is really kind of just a way of, you can think of it almost as object-based design. You have inheritance, and you can kind of extend an existing class, overwrite existing methods. So the idea would be also that long-term, you could have these pretty generic directives which do most of the functionality you want, but then in your page-specific logic, you say, okay, I want to extend this generic directive and kind of overwrite some stuff in the way I want to do it. Yeah, so any more questions? I'll show you the directive code in just a sec, but back there. So I'm not sure if I understand your question perfectly. As far as I can tell, like, it doesn't depend on your view, because all the controller is saying is, whenever this before submit promise happens, I don't know what could have caused this or why. I don't really care. I want to call this function, and then I'm going to pass it back a promise. And that's presumably going to affect the execution of UI form, but I don't really know. Like, so yeah, once again, I don't really understand. You can maybe explain yourself better?
Calling the hook from inside and seems like that has to be self-aware that it's already inside this callback. Just returning true or false, you know.
Right. So to me, this is allowable because the controller is page-specific logic already. Like and essentially we just want to say like, okay, we know enough to know that when we get this submit error on the form, we want to trigger this message because we have an on hook up here, and then this is a call hook. So the directive triggers the on hook. The controller initiates the call hook. It's kind of a different way of communicating. Does that answer your question, like satisfactorily, or can you maybe explain some more? Okay, right there.
Can you talk more about like the games? Like, what's the motivation for this? It's super interesting that like most of what you're doing can be recoded in other means.
Right. So I guess so to me the question comes down to, do you like the hooks approach better or the traditional plus method? I think it's pretty easy to say the traditional method, the one you see in the Angular demos, is like garbage.
But a lot of what you're doing in hooks can be done in a more Angular-y type way.
So you.
It's a very Angular way of extending controller, for instance, and putting things in a scope before you pass it to a separate controller.
So I'm not familiar with any way of extending controllers. Like, yeah.
Yeah, you can do it. But
Like you can decorate them, I know.
well, so one of the things that we do is we have specific, blocks of code, and they can appear, either as part of a page or part of like a modal dialog. And when they appear as part of a modal dialog, they have a dialog that gets injected to them. So what we have is we have a controller that basically extends the dialog version. That just when it injects dialog, it injects it as just undefined, so it doesn't like break. But basically, what you do is you just call that directive or that controller from the other one, where you can pass in your own scope to it. You can, basically say what you're going to inject into it, and you could take and build your own scope, set anything you wanted on it, and then pass that to the core directive. So when you call that one that you've done that to, you're effectively, extended it like you are here. You couldn't do it with all things, but like this example,
Right here.
controller stuff.
So you could essentially just do that like this exactly. Or no, sorry.
The previous one, you had the extend, like this thing.
Right here, yeah, okay.
Exactly that.
Okay, I did not know that.
Okay, so.
That's cool though. I don't know how you do that. To me, like this is pretty easy, but like so it sounds like you have to create a new one for that one.
Well, is this a new one, or is it part
No, you're extending the hooks controller itself. So what's happening internally?
And so where would you have that? In a new file?
Yeah, in a new file.
And yeah, so you would have a different controller that's an extended version that you've named, but you could still call either one. Is that not true?
So no, like you're actually, so like imagine the hooks controller function. So right here, like literally what that hook is doing is it's adding right here like that extra code.
So I understand that, and I guess the motivation is why not just put that extra code right there?
So this is I was worried I chose a poor example. In this particular case, the reason I put the code here is because this type of stuff doesn't belong in the controller. Like, not when I say the controller, I mean the page. Like, so in Angular, the controller is responsible for setting the scope, basically, of a page. And most of the time, the scope, we the typical view is we just want to get data, we want to populate the data, and so the view can have it. And then all the static information is just kind of living in the view. Practically, though, in my experience, like there's also configuration, which is different than from model data. So this, to me, is view configuration, and the only way you can really do that configuration is inside of a controller, and that's why I like to separate into a different file.
Is there an advantage to it? I mean, I
No.
don't agree with you. I'm just,
No, so
I have almost identical blocks to that in my controllers all over the place. So I'm wondering, like, should I not do that? Is there a good reason?
so I think the advantage is that your controllers truly can become completely agnostic about the view. Like they just truly don't know and don't care.
But I mean, this is MVC. Isn't every controller by definition bound to a view?
Yeah, I mean, like you do want to populate the scope data, and no, I mean, I think at that point it just really becomes preference. The extend is really meant more probably for directives.
Right. I can see a lot more benefits in the directive space.
Yeah. So yeah. So any other takes, like advantages, like I just want to maybe like how like I want to improve this framework. So maybe just like take a poll. Like if you were to think about putting this in production tomorrow, like what would you be hesitant about? Imagining the technology behind it was good, like not going to break or blow up anything. Right there.
One thing for Drupal that was required was a sequence of hooks. So you can specify a weight. The problem with that was it required entry in the database. So it had a hook registry.
Right.
Unload. It would say this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And people would like do the hands thing, maybe like 1,000, 1 million. But it was required. It turned out to be required in many cases for modules that wanted to make best advantage of the system.
No, that makes sense. And you would have to figure out something like that in order to get it really working as you want. There's another person back there.
I don't enjoy using hooks. I think one way you maybe get around that is to have that form be injectable into your controller, so you're actually adding functions into an actual object instead of using this. I hate to use the term magic string, but it's like we're attaching something to this string which may or may not be the right string. Or if you could pass the UI form into your controller, you could have the same thought before you could do it.
So I mean, so basically, like if your hooks controller wanted to interact with the UI form,
In your controller, yeah, you know how you attach the hooks. Why not just have the UI form be an object that can be injected into your controller? And you can attach the functions on that.
no, and that's one way you could do it. I think there are some practical difficulties to doing that. I mean, but functionally that is equivalent to this. It's just this is just a little more like manual. And also what I also like about this approach also is that it is attached to the scope. So all these hooks will be destroyed when the scope is destroyed. So you're not going to have all these like listeners that aren't doing anything. So.
Another thing I'm curious about is how you feel your GUI form DSL is better than simply like a view engine, or it seems like you've done this to be more terse in the description of the form. I wonder if you've thought about the pros and cons of this versus using something else like a view engine or transfer JS or something like that.
I mean, so I guess the thing is like, I mean, that probably could be true. I can't think of any other way that I would do this differently in a purely Angular way. Like, I mean, I'd be open to other ways, but it seems like this is how you would do it in Angular. This is the traditional plus method. Like, and you know, if this is what you prefer, like by all means, it seems like this would be like go for it. But at that point, it just kind of becomes a taste preference. So I've got to go. Sorry, it takes forever, but yeah, I would ask for more questions, but we're out of time. Okay.
I got to talk into this thing. All right. Can you hear me? We good? All right. And okay, let me know if this is too small or illegible in any way. You're doing Firebase. Woo is right. This is pretty much the best. I'm really, really happy about Firebase. So, okay, quick show of hands. Has anyone here used Firebase? Like four people? Okay, good. Be nice to me if I say something stupid. I'll try not to. So I built this little application, little invoicing application, using Firebase just as a test because I never really used Firebase and didn't know, I mean, Angular Fire just came out. It's this great Angular library for Firebase. I really wanted to use it. So I built an application around it kind of for fun for sending invoices. So it's pretty simplistic application. A little more sophisticated than a to-do app. There's some authentication involved. And I'm actually saving the data, and it actually works and is in production. I use it. But I mean, it's not a super complicated application. But it didn't need to be on Firebase at all. But I've found Firebase to be a really fun fit with Angular. Firebase is a little tricky. Definitely, it's a paradigm shift from what you're used to. So if you're used to relational databases, you got to start thinking more in like NoSQL document storage. That's what Firebase is. It's document storage. But the nice thing about Firebase is you also get this real-time updating to all your clients that are connected to Firebase. So you get WebSocket connections, and it's all available online. Someone else hosts it, and any client can access it. You can treat it like a NoSQL database. So you can, from your, let's say, an Express server. So I use an Express server with mine. You can do private stuff on there that's not accessible to anybody else and just stash data from your server-side scripts out to Firebase. You can manipulate data in Firebase that's available to the whole world as well from your server. But, I mean, that's not super special. The super special part about Firebase is that you can also surface parts of that database to the whole world and to all the clients that want to hook up to it, and they can just fly with it. And you can write client-side stuff. The tricky part about writing client-side stuff in Firebase is the security of it. Because you don't want to be putting your secret keys in the client. There are a lot of things you can't do in a client. You don't want your browser, like let's say you're doing Stripe transactions. I do a lot of Stripe transactions. I'm not going to put any of my Stripe keys in the browser. That'd be ridiculous because someone else could sniff them, they'd see them. So it's hard to get away with doing an application with any sort of security just with Firebase. You end up having to have some sort of server of some kind handling the secure elements of your application. So I have a small Express server that handles all of my email and all of my Stripe connections. And it also does some secure manipulations on Firebase as well. So when you think about Firebase, don't think about it as a single solution. Think of it as a really nice way to get data available via WebSockets to all your clients. And certain data is great to put on Firebase. Other data you can put there, but you have to manage it from your server side. So, okay, Firebase comes with an Angular library called Angular Fire, which gives you all the auth that you need and all of the quick ways to connect to Firebase endpoints. But before I go there, I'd like to quickly show you what my
my Firebase looks like. Okay, so Firebase, you get data. It's document data, all denormalized stuff. And you get security rules, which is this sort of domain-specific kind of JSON-y thing that they did to secure your data. And then you have simple login. And so I'd like to start with simple login and work back through the data and then hit the security rules. Okay. So with simple login, you can use the Angular Fire library to create users using with the Facebook login, Twitter, GitHub, Google, some persona, anonymous, or email and password. So I use email and password. I create users from my client side. So my Angular application creates the user. And I can create as many as I want. So I have a login screen, and all it does is pass up an email and a password. Firebase catches the email and password, creates a registered user right there, and then returns the registered user back to my function. Then from there, my client creates the rest of the user object in the actual data structure. So one of the nice things about this, you don't have to worry so much about your authentication. You get some freebies here. You also get, free send password, reset email, stuff like that. You get all these great functions that you typically have to write yourself or use a library to achieve. Okay. So let's look at a little bit of code. When you get Firebase in there, you add it to your module, and you got to inject a couple things. You inject $Firebase, and you inject $Firebase simple login. You also have to make sure that you have the Firebase object, capital F Firebase, on your window. So I've got a Firebase. I can create a new Firebase, and I pass in some environment. So basically an endpoint. It's like a REST endpoint. So in this case, it's the path to my Firebase, this particular Firebase. It's my HTTP/whatever. And that creates an instance of Firebase, a Firebase reference. Then I pass that reference in through a simple login, Firebase simple login, to get my login object. Then I can do all the login, log out stuff that I need to through this object. Next, I need to create another reference. So I'm going to make a new Firebase, but this time I'm not doing it to the root. I'm doing it to the root/users. So I'm connecting straight to the users portion of my data. And then I'm passing this new guy into $Firebase to create the user's ref, an angularized Firebase reference. If you look at the docs for Angular Fire, they do this stuff in a controller. It's up to you. I like it in a service, because then I can inject it all over the place, and I just have this one user service that I use in a few different spots. But you can do it in a service. You don't have to do it in a controller like they show you in their docs. So then I'll do just simple stuff here, like use queue-deferred, get current user, then I've got the current user, and then I'll resolve it. Or here, let's show you. I want to show the function to create a user. Okay, so if I want to create a user, I use Firebase simple login and the $create user. I pass in an email and a password, and I get back a user. It's that simple. Get back the user, and then I take the users ref I already had, that's to my Firebase/users, and I start building out a user object that's specific to that user so I can get data. Because the persona that Firebase keeps track of doesn't have any data associated with it. It just has an ID and an email, and then this password that you can't see. So right here, as soon as I get that user back, I say, all right, great. Make a user ref. I want to make a user ref off of my base. User / I want to make a new user. So I'm just creating a reference, and it automatically creates the user when I save it. So a new ref to user / this user ID. And the ID is what I got from, the ID is off of here, so 1 or 2. Or the next one I make will be 3. And then to that user ref, I then add the email off the user. Then I call $save off of the user ref, and I resolve my deferreds. So it's pretty simple. Took a little while to figure this out, but when you create a user, that function on their client then creates the user here under the users system. and then I build it out from there. Okay, so don't have a whole lot of time. I want to go over a couple gotchas with this. The biggest trick to getting Firebase right is planning out your data structure. And you got to plan it out with an understanding of the security rules and how they cascade. Okay, so security rules. I'll try. This is tricky, and you have to read the docs a little bit to figure this out, but I'll try to give you a quick overview. I could specify right here, users 1. Well, it has to be a string. And then I could give it read access, or like .read false. I could do that for any user. So in this users, under this rule, I can do users. I can do users 1 or 2, 3, 4. I can reference users by their IDs. Or I put in just this $user, and that's anything that's not been referenced. So it's the wildcard, basically. So in my application, I'm not referencing any users. I could make a user with an ID of admin and treat them separately. Now the trick to this, and this is the gotcha that really messed me up. The trick is that once you add write or read privileges at one level, you add, that user then gets them the whole way down the chain. So there's this special variable available in your rules called auth. So it's your auth object. And so right at the top, I say, hey, for all users, if that user right there equals, because it's user slash the ID, that's the path. So user slash ID. So this $user then becomes the ID. If that ID equals the auth ID, give them read and give them write. I can't deny them read or write farther down. So the way that Firebase works is it starts at the top and tunnels down. As soon as it gets a thumbs up, it calls it, says you got access. And it'll give them access to everything below. So you have to plan your data such that you don't have, you have stuff broken out. So you can break it out according to security privileges. If you don't break it out according to security privileges, which I did not do the first time, I went back to secure it and realized, oh shoot, I'm giving access to people that shouldn't have access because I gave it to them at the top. But I don't want them to have access to every single little thing down the tree. So the next thing I do is I've got invoices. I've got a secret key, a stripe key, so read is false. Now, the user who owns this is always going to have access to read this thing. I can't deny them that access. But any other users that I want to give access to, I can deny them. So if I sent the email to your email address, you need to be able to access some data in the structure. So I couldn't put, so I need to give you access, the other party, the recipient, needs access to the details of the invoice and the charge object on the invoice, the stripe charge object. So what I said is, hey, auth.email, if that equals, so whatever auth they have, that their email address is associated with it. So this auth.email in this case is the other user. If the recipient of the recipient email equals, so this data point .child recipient .child email .val, that'll pull the user's email from the invoice. It'll pull it off of the invoice's recipient and off of their email and then pull the value out. If that equals the auth email, then I give them read to the details. And similarly with the charge, data.parent, I go up one. So I go back up to the invoice level, then back down through details, child, recipient, email, and get it again. So I can grant specific read privileges to another user. And then they can then access the invoice, they can pay it. Now when they pay it, they don't have a right to this. So all of the write that I do, I have to do off of my Express server. You end up having to do quite a bit of Express work to make this really secure. But yeah, the great part is it's a super flexible. I mean, these are not hard to write. I can change the security. If it's broken, I can test it with the simulator and make sure I got the right security. Yeah, okay. Now real quick, anything else? Oh yeah, the other gotcha. Okay, this is specific to Angular. When you add when you decide to treat an object in Firebase like an array, Firebase can't do arrays. It can't handle the zero indexed array. It will always create its own keys when you start adding things. So when I add an invoice, I say, hey, invoices, give me, I made an invoice, built out an object, and in my client I said, $Firebase $add, and I added it. When I add it, it's effectively a push onto the invoices object, but it doesn't get pushed in like an array, it gets pushed in with this ID. Now the trick is, this guy, this invoice, when I get the reference later, he doesn't know what his ID is. So I have to keep track in Angular at a higher level of all the IDs. So when you do a loop through the invoices, you have to do an object-style loop, keeping track of the key and the value inside the loop. It's not a big deal, but you lose all the really nice filtering and order by stuff that you get.
So just so that people understand why you don't do arrays in Firebase, one of the big things about Firebase is it's real time. So if you have like a chat application, you have a million people chatting all at once. If I send a message and somebody else sends a message, which index does it put it at? Right? So instead they create an ID and just add that to the object.
Right.
So that's why.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
Too bad, but that's just the way it is.
that makes a lot of sense, and it's not critical. You do get object looping, but yeah, it returns them in order, keeps the order straight, so you don't have to worry about the order. But if you want to do any filtering, like order by filter, those sorts of things, you kind of have to write your own filters for that. I found it actually easier to write functions on my controller, pass the object in, and into that function pass both my array of objects of invoices plus whatever filter and stuff, and do the filtering and the sorting in my controller manually. Kind of sucks, but you know, it's not really that bad. Once you figure it out, I don't have to worry about it anymore. I've got really detailed control over the sort in my controller. So yeah, it's real time, so it's pretty exciting to just to see something like this and be able to edit it. I mean, you just make changes. You make changes on the document, and as you go, you can sit back and watch those changes get reflected on this page. And you can change the data live right through this page and see the changes hit your page. So sometimes when I'm testing, I'll be deleting on this page, creating, deleting, creating, and just making sure that everything works smoothly. It's got really great responsiveness, and yeah. Yeah, well, the paid plan is $50. The first paid plan is, I think, $50 a month. But you don't have to pay until you get 50 concurrent users or a gig of data and quite a bit of throughput. So I'm using this in production. I haven't paid for it yet. I mean, I've got hundreds of users, but they're not all on at the same time. Most I've ever had on at once is like 19. So I'm not even close.
I think what they do is they start you on like they call it a hacker plan.
Yeah.
And once you try to get a 50th user, it'll just say no.
Yeah, well, they do. They say they do a soft limit. I don't know how that works because I haven't hit it yet.
I think the soft limit is for the paid plans only, though. For the hacker plan,
Okay.
once you get 50, it says no.
I believe that. That makes sense. And as soon as I get close to it, I'll just pay for it. It's not a big deal. I mean, it's not that expensive. $50 for this kind of service, and me not having to worry about it is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it gives me all my login. It gives me all the security stuff. And, I mean, I don't want to show you guys my Express. It's kind of nasty, but there's a lot. You can do really secure stuff in here, too. There's no reason you have to make the stuff available to everybody to read. So, any questions? Anything? We good? Okay. Awesome. This thing sucks.
I probably could have. Hey, thanks everyone for coming out. There's still some food left. I think Jason Dobry's speaking next month. He spoke a few months ago. He's going to kind of do a continuation on from his previous talk. So anyway, we'll see you guys next month. And like I said, feel free to hang out for a bit. Thank you.